In Japan, hospitals are built on a foundation of silence and strict protocol, but they are also places governed by ancient fears. You'll rarely find a room 4 or a 4th floor in older Japanese medical facilities because the word for 4 is a homophone for the word for death. When the sun goes down and the sterile white lights of the hallways dim, that superstition stops being a cultural quirk and starts feeling like a warning. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 supposedly true stories from people who encountered the unexplainable in the halls of Japanese hospitals, where the urban legends are very, very real. I moved to Nagoya in 2021 to work as an IT consultant. 6 months in, I was hospitalized for a severe kidney infection at a facility that was modern on the outside, but had wings dating back to the late 1970s. My room was at the very end of a long, narrow corridor in the East Wing. In Japan, hospital doors are often sliding doors, shoji style but made of heavy wood and metal. They make a very specific clack sound when they open. On my 3rd night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to that exact sound, clack. I looked toward the door. It was sliding open, but no one was there. I figured it was just a draft or a mechanical failure. But then, I saw a woman standing in the hallway, just past the threshold. She was wearing a traditional white nurse's uniform from a much older era, complete with the peaked cap. She was also wearing a surgical mask, which is common in Japan, but hers looked yellowed and old. "Is it time for my checkup?" I asked, my voice cracking from sleep. She didn't answer. She just stood there, perfectly still. Then, she took a single step into my room. She moved with a strange, jerky motion, like a stop-motion film. She leaned over my bed, and that's when I noticed her eyes. They weren't just bloodshot. The pupils were tiny, like pinpricks in a sea of white. She reached up and slowly began to pull down her surgical mask. As she did, she whispered in Japanese, "Am I pretty?" My heart stopped. I knew the legend of the Kuchisake-onna, the slit-mouthed woman, but I never expected to see her in a clinical setting. As the mask dropped, I saw that her mouth was sliced open from ear to ear, the wound raw and glistening in the dim emergency light. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I lunged for the call button, but she was faster. Her hand, ice cold and smelling of old copper, clapped over my mouth. Her grip was impossibly strong. She leaned in closer, the stench of decay coming from her open maw, and whispered, "I'll make you pretty too." Just as she reached into her pocket for something metallic, the door to the next room slammed shut down the hall. The sound startled her. She hissed, turned, and sprinted out of the room. Not running, but crawling on all 4s at an incredible speed, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor. When the real nurses arrived, they found me curled in a ball. They checked the security tapes, but all they saw was my door sliding open on its own and me reacting to an empty room. I checked out against medical advice the next morning. This story was sent in by a woman named Hana, who worked as a night shift lab technician in a university hospital in Tokyo. One of my duties was to transport blood samples from the emergency room to the pathology lab in the sub-basement. To get there, I had to use an old service elevator that everyone on staff hated. It was slow, cramped, and occasionally stopped between floors for no reason. One Tuesday night, I stepped into the elevator with a cooler of samples. I pressed B2. The doors groaned shut. As the elevator began its descent, the lights flickered and then died completely, leaving me in total darkness. Then, the elevator stopped. It wasn't at a floor. It was somewhere in between. I reached for the emergency phone, but before I could touch it, a small, pale hand reached out from the corner of the elevator. A corner I knew had been empty when I stepped in. The hand was tiny, like a child's, but the skin looked translucent, with dark blue veins bulging underneath. It began to pull at the hem of my lab coat. "Help me!" A child's voice whimpered from the floor of the elevator. "It's too heavy! Help me lift it!" I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam hit the floor. There was a young boy, maybe 7 years old, crouching in the corner. He was wearing a patient gown, but his legs were missing from the knees down. It looked like they had been crudely amputated. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor of the elevator, scratching at the metal with his fingernails until they began to bleed. "The number 4, he sobbed. "They put me in room 4. Now I can't leave." The elevator suddenly lurched. The boy looked up, and his face began to distort, his features melting like wax under a flame. He let out a piercing shriek that sounded like grinding metal. The elevator doors suddenly slid open, revealing the pitch-black elevator shaft between floors. The boy lunged toward the opening, falling into the darkness. I heard him hit the bottom of the shaft with a wet thud. The elevator suddenly regained power and shot down to the basement. When the doors opened, I ran to the security office. They searched the elevator shaft, thinking a child had actually fallen. They found nothing. No body, no blood. Later, a senior technician told me that 30 years ago, a boy had been accidentally crushed by that very elevator after wandering out of a room on the 4th floor. A room that was converted into a storage closet shortly after because so many accidents happened there. Our final story comes from a man who was staying in a rural hospital in the Tohoku region after a hiking accident. The hospital was old, with wooden floors that creaked under every footstep. I was in a ward with 3 other beds, but I was the only patient there that night. Around midnight, I heard a sound coming from the ceiling. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like a large animal was nesting in the crawl space above my bed. I tried to ignore it, but then a drop of something warm and thick fell onto my forehead. I wiped it away. It was dark red. Blood. I looked up at the ceiling tiles. One of them was slightly askew. As I watched, a long, thin finger, gray and skeletal, hooked over the edge of the tile and pulled it back. A face peered down. It was a man, but his skin was stretched so tightly over his skull that he looked like a living mummy. He had no hair, and his ears had been removed. He just stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. He began to squeeze himself through the narrow gap in the ceiling. His bones made a sickening cracking sound as he forced his torso out. He was unnaturally long, his limbs spindly and reaching. He hung from the ceiling like a spider, swaying back and forth just inches above my face. "Are you the one?" he hissed. His voice sounded like dry leaves blowing on pavement. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. He reached out a long finger and traced the line of my throat. His touch felt like a hot wire. "Not yet," he muttered to himself. "You still have too much life in you. I'll wait." He began to retreat back into the ceiling, his body contorting and folding in ways that shouldn't be humanly possible. He replaced the ceiling tile perfectly. I didn't say a word to the staff. I knew they wouldn't believe me. But for the rest of my stay, I kept my eyes fixed on that tile. Every night, exactly at midnight, I would hear that same scritch, 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 and I would see the edge of the tile move just a fraction of an inch, as if something was checking to see if I was ready yet. I was discharged 2 days later. I've never gone back to that part of Japan. Japan is a country of incredible beauty and modern wonders, but its hospitals hold secrets that date back centuries. If you ever find yourself in a Japanese medical ward late at night, pay attention to the room numbers. And if you hear a sound from the ceiling or see a door slide open on its own, don't look. Some things are better left in the shadows. If you have a true story you'd like to share, let me know. I'll see you in the next one.